I think I've known my purpose since high school, but I lost it for a lot of years. And I'm finally back at a place in my life where I'm finding it again and finding words for it and starting to actually pursue it and not let it just be an idea in my head or a feeling in my gut.
Welcome back to another episode of 10,000 Heroes. Remember, it's not just a podcast, it's a hero generation machine. Which for me, the whole point, as far as I can tell, is the evolution of society towards love, acceptance, and understanding of complexity. And the only way we're going to get there is through the humans. That's right, personal change. So here on the show, we define a hero as somebody whose life and work is in alignment with their highest purpose and their unique abilities and story. And my guest today is exactly that. Her name is Casey Jourdan, and she has an incredible and surprising story of loss, injury, resilience, humor, and personal power. I was deeply moved by our conversation, and I feel really gifted to know her. And at the end of the show, she dropped some real wisdom, Casey's 8 rules of life, that I was so excited by, I decided to do a whole other episode with her just on that topic. So look out for that one in the coming weeks as well. And here we go. Two of the themes that keep coming up for me, both in my life, in my work, and of course on the show, are vision and purpose. And when we met the other day, I just had this little inkling that you had found something that, in some manner of speaking, you might call your purpose, and that you had found that recently. Is there any truth to that?
I think I've known my purpose since high school, but I lost it for a lot of years. And I'm finally back at a place in my life where I'm finding it again and finding words for it and starting to actually pursue it and not let it just be an idea in my head or a feeling in my gut.
Would you take us a little bit through that journey of maybe what you were like in high school, what it looked like? I mean, this is always fun and embarrassing asking people about high school. So what you were like in high school, how did that show up for you in high school? How did you have that knowledge? And then kind of what happened between then and now?
Yeah, I'll try to do the not giant version of that story because that's a big question.
We have a lot of time and I know how to edit, so we're good.
Perfect. So in high school, to set the scene, I was the quirky theater kid. I was behind the scenes person, not an actress, but I wore gold leopard print boxers to class. I let people draw on me and on my clothes to kill time during class. It was just I had dreams of joining the circus when I got out of high school. My goal was to be a lighting and pyrotechnics professional at the circus. I ended up joining the U.S. military instead, which surprisingly similar feel.
Okay.
I got to blow stuff up for part of my job, so I did get that. But I remember in high school, people would always ask, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" But I said, I don't know, and I don't care. But if I can make one person's day a little bit better each and every day, I can die happy. And that was kind of always the driving force, whether it was as simple as smiling at someone and telling them I liked their outfit, up to some sort of act of service. Didn't matter. I just wanted to know I made somebody's day a little better. And then, like I said, I actually joined the military the July before the September 11th attacks. So it was the summer between my senior year of high school. So my senior year of high school had just started when the US was attacked.
Okay, so this is 2001.
Yes.
It's between your junior and senior year of high school. Where did you go to high school?
Bozeman, Montana. I grew up, born and raised in Montana.
In Montana. And how, I didn't know that you could, join the military in high school. Is that a typical thing? How did that work?
Not typical. Most people turn 18, graduate, and sign up kind of as they graduate. But you can actually enlist at the age of 17 with parental consent. Basically, my parents waived their rights and said I was adult enough to make any further decisions myself. So I actually enlisted right after my 17th birthday. And so I was already in the military. I didn't do basic training or anything until after graduation. So basically, I had 1 year that I was in the National Guard. I was showing up for drill weekends. I was in the military, but I was not deployable since I was still a high school kid. and I hadn't gone to basic training yet. And so that kind of was the framework of my entire senior years, then watching the war in Afghanistan unfold, knowing I'm in the service, but I'm National Guard, and they always said that National Guard and females never deploy overseas. And so I didn't worry about it too much. I finished a relatively normal senior year of high school. And right after high school, I shipped out for basic training and my military police school. And 3 months after coming home from all my schools, my unit was deployed, and we ended up in Baghdad for just over a year. And I was wounded the last 3 weeks of our tour. I was wounded in a roadside bombing.
Okay, I mean, I'm going to have you go through all of that much slower because there's a lot of density there. I mean, I got to start at the beginning, or at the beginning of what you've shared. How did you go from like circus ideation to signing up for the military a year before most people even consider it?
My brother had struggled with drug issues. He's 5 years older than me. I had struggled with substance abuse issues. And in that drive to help other people, I wanted to prevent other people from going through what my family went through. My brother was kicked out of the house. He was estranged for a while. It's been 20 years since then, and we have a great relationship now. He's gotten clean, but I decided to go into law enforcement because then I could stop drug use. It was very, a caveat on every life experience I have. I am white, cis. I grew up very privileged. I grew up middle class with both my parents in the house. I didn't understand the nuance of what law enforcement is, what law enforcement does. I thought I could kind of just stop kids from using drugs and save the world as a cop.
God, that is fascinating. That would never have occurred to me. That you went into, and this is great for me because I'm building awareness and empathy. But you, and potentially many people like you, go into law enforcement thinking that that's how you stop people from using drugs.
Yeah. Yep. And typically, this, again, 20 years ago, cops weren't hired when they were 18, 19, 20 years old. You had to have, at least where I grew up, where I wanted to work, you had to have a bachelor's degree. And so I was like, okay, what's better? It was this perfect scenario of I can join the National Guard. So you actually stay in your home state. You work 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year. They pay for my college so I can work on that bachelor's degree. And it so happened I was able to join a unit that is military police. And so I could start being a cop at 17 and building my resume as law enforcement while I got a degree in criminal justice. And then it was by the time I'm 22, police departments are going to be clamoring to hire me. I did not plan for the Iraq war and getting deployed at 18 years old. That derailed that entire plan and that entire concept. And so that was the original goal, was to go into law enforcement, to serve the community I grew up in and make a difference for the families there. And all of that got completely derailed by deployment.
Okay. So it's a combination. The vision was, I want to serve the community. I want to help people not get into drugs because I saw what happened to my brother. And this is a way to pay for it and get really good kind of credibility on my resume by the time I graduate from college.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. And then September 11th, Afghanistan war. And then you said you went through some trainings and then got deployed to Iraq. From my memory, the war in Iraq officially started 2003, April or something. 2002?
Yes. Sorry. No, you're right. 2003. It all blurs together way faster than that in my brain. Yeah.
But that means you had quite a bit of training. Did you just train?
4 months of schools. 4 months of schools. So 2 months for basic training, straight into 2 months for military police school. And then I came home I was home for 5 or 6 months, long enough to I took a couple months off. I got enrolled in college. I started at the local college, moved into my own apartment for the first time ever, and was doing the normal college kid. I was doing the thing that I'd planned to do. And so I started my first semester of college would have been January of 2003. And the week of midterms, I actually still very distinctly remembered I was sleeping in my dorm room instead of studying, and I get a phone call, and they asked for my legal name. They said, "Hey, is Cassandra there?" And nobody in my life, not even my mother, calls me Cassandra. It's a name on paper and that's it. And I was like, what the hell? It's yeah, this is her. And it was one of my sergeants, and he said, "Hey, we're getting deployed. We don't know where. We don't know how long we'll be gone. but you need to pack a bag, you need to write your will and have it on file, and you need to report in 4 days. And so in 4 days, I packed my dorm, moved my stuff back into my parents' house. I had my mom help me write my will and get it signed and put in places that it needed to be. And 4 days later, we left the state of Montana. We spent, I think, almost 2 months stateside in Georgia training before we actually went overseas. So I was on deployment, but still in the United States when the Marines crossed the berm and the war in Iraq officially started.
Okay. And I don't talk to veterans a lot about their experiences. So I just want to be, I don't know what the word is, cautious, gentle. Are you open to talking about your experience?
Yeah. Like I said, I'm 100% open book about what I've been through. I, like, full disclaimer, very might well cry at some point, but like, give me a second. It's okay. I'm okay. And I'm happy to share, because a lot of people don't understand this stuff. And so it's important to me to help be that voice when and where I can.
Yeah, fantastic. So maybe if I could even let you lead, because I don't know that I would ask the right questions. What should I know about your experience and the people like you who did that in 2003?
Gosh, there's so many things. Again, like, I have to highlight what a naive kid I was. Like, people signed up. So I actually have a TEDx talk titled Life After War, Not Another Hero's Story, because I joined the military to pay for college. I didn't join out of patriotism. I didn't join because of 9/11. I was already in, so there wasn't some hero complex we often get assigned to us as veterans. Like, I was a kid who signed up for a very dangerous job, not realizing how dangerous that job could be. And so even as we were literally getting issued desert-colored uniforms and getting issued rifles and showing up in the Middle East, I didn't grasp the reality of what I was doing. And so for me, and a lot of the guys I worked with, to survive in that situation, the war to me wasn't about the politics that we talk about back home. You know, we talk about freedom and we talk about liberating women and we talk about things like that. And I didn't understand that at that age, partly. And also, to do my job day in and day out, I couldn't pay attention to that. My entire driving purpose every day was to keep the 9 guys that I worked with alive. That's all I cared about day in and day out. And that's the case for a lot of us. We're not there. There are guys who are there for some big hero complex, save America, you know, bring democracy to the world. But most of us are just doing a job and trying to stay alive and get back to our families.
Yeah, it's a very different narrative. Then there's like these larger questions of whether or not there are weapons of mass destruction, or whether or not the war is justified, or who's profiting from it, or whether it's good or bad.
Right. And a lot of times, especially so early in the war, so like I said, I was still in the US, but already activated when the Marines crossed the berm. So a lot of times they put us on what they refer to as a media blackout, because they actually don't want us to understand what's going on, partially for security reasons at this point in my life. I also think now for psychological reasons. But like at the beginning of the Iraq and Afghanistan, the Iraq war, there was a campaign that the news referred to as shock and awe, where we went in and bombed a whole bunch of stuff. I didn't hear about that till a year later, until after I came home from the war. I didn't know what it was. I went and talked to a high school class, and somebody asked me my thoughts on shock and awe, and I had to go Google it because we had been put on a media blackout. I didn't know that happened. And so like there's this weird, the world gets really distorted, especially early on, because our war was one of the first that was like 24/7 in the media. Like for the first time in my mom's adult life, she got cable because she could keep CNN on and watch what was happening in Iraq and watch the news and see, kind of as a way to hope that I didn't show up on the news and like keep tabs on what was happening in the war. And so we were in this war that was simultaneously constantly broadcast, while sometimes we weren't allowed to watch that for intelligence purposes. And sometimes we used it every day for intelligence purposes. It's a very distorted, when you're living in the midst of it, it gets very distorted.
Gosh, I just was thinking about your mom. That I mean, obviously many parents go through that, but what a strategy. It doesn't seem like a great strategy to me.
No, I learned later on that her mental health really struggled while I was deployed, and I don't. I mean, it makes sense. I don't blame her at all. But yeah, it's this constant worry of.
And if you miss an hour of TV, then you don't know if your child is alive. You can only confirm their existence by watching all the time.
Yeah, exactly. And like then also this simultaneous, you don't want to know what's going on because it's just constant bad news. And she doesn't know who I know or necessarily where I was at, what jobs I was doing. But she knew enough that actually, so I was wounded the last like 3 weeks of our tour. The convoy I was in got hit by a roadside bomb. And my injuries were such that I actually stayed in country, and I can elaborate on that. I didn't get medevaced out, partly by my own choice. And somebody leaked to the local paper that a unit from Montana had been hit before I got a chance to tell my mom I was okay. And there was only 40 of us from Montana at the time in Iraq. And like this whole situation played out to where my mom knew I had to have been in that convoy. And so I called her, and I wasn't going to tell her till I got stateside that I had been hurt, because I was ultimately, I was not as fine as I thought I was, but I was staying in country. And so like I called my mom because I need to hear my mom's voice. Like I just almost got killed. And I'm trying to play it off that nothing's wrong. And she's like, I saw the article in the paper this morning that that a team got hit. And I know your team is the only team conducting operations right now. Were you there? And I was like, actually, yeah, I was hit and I was hurt, but I'm fine. And I'm going to stay for 3 more weeks and finish my tour. And it was like, so she found out before I could tell her, and then had to worry about me for 3 more weeks while we finished our tour and I could come home. And I did apologize to doing that to her. Like, I was like, I was going to try to lie to you. And I know I probably should have left country. Like looking back on my injuries, hindsight, I should have left country, but it wasn't a choice I could make at that point in time.
Earlier, you said that your daily focus was to try to keep these other 9 people alive. Is that way of talking? Is that what everybody would say? Or did you have a specific role where you like the medic or the route planner or something that's how it works?
For me, it was both. All of us were focused on keeping each other alive. That's our job. We depend on each other, life and death, whatever your job is. And so we all look to each other constantly for that. My job specifically, I worked as a turret gunner. So the person that stands outside the top of the Humvee with the big guns. And so we are the eyes and the ears of the truck. And we're kind of the first line of defense. If we see something go wrong, typically we're the first to react to it. And sometimes I would be the one to alert my driver, because Humvees have terrible like field of vision. Like you can kind of just see the road in front of you. And so my job is to watch 360, watch all the rest of it and interpret all of the things that are happening around us. And so I would often be the one to tell my driver, like, stop the truck. We can't go down that road. Hey, I see something over there. We need to go investigate that. You know, there's a lot of communication that happened between my driver and myself. And I felt extra responsible because I was those eyes and ears for our team.
Yeah. Okay. So it's like a periscope. You can swivel 3, and you're responsible for observation, but then also you have this big gun.
Yes. And so if we were to get attacked, I mean, every time something happened, I'm the first to make a decision to respond to it. And so like when we got blown up, when we got hit, I turn my weapon to fire, I take it out the safety off, and I start looking to see if I can figure out who did it. And I start watching for a secondary attack, because it was very common back then that they would detonate an explosive, because then we would stop our trucks to see what happened, and then they would open fire on us. And so constantly, like we're getting constant security briefs of these tactics. And so my job is like, oh, we just got blown up. I trust my driver to navigate us through this situation. He trusts me to make sure nobody's going to start shooting at us. And if they do, I'm going to be the first to shoot back and tell everybody where they are. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of how the team dynamic works.
And there's 10 people in this thing?
So we traveled 3 trucks with 3 people in each truck.
Okay.
So you'd have a driver, a team leader, and a gunner. And then our overall main mission, we did a lot of escorting people to places that they needed to be. So we usually had also our commander with us, our unit commander, and he was there more. He was the important guy going places. It was our job to get him to and from those places safely. And so he was kind of just along for the ride while we were out on the road.
And what was he doing in these places? He's just like having coffee or meeting dissidents, or like, what's he doing?
The higher level mission that we were a part of was rebuilding the Baghdad Police Department. And so we had 3 police stations that we were primarily in charge of. And so we would be going out to these police stations to check on them, make sure they had supplies, help with training issues. We created a new system for creating ID badges and making sure that police officers got paid. We started issuing police officers weapons and taking them to the ranges to help train them. So a lot of the news back then talked about training the Iraq and Afghanistan military. We were doing the same thing, but just with the police department. So we were constantly running out to different police departments to check on them. And I don't know, the commander was in meetings, and I know there was a lot of tea that got drunk, but like we sat outside and did security. So like he would go inside and do the meetings. We would hang out front of that police station and help provide security for that police station while we were in the area. And then he'd get in the truck and we'd get him back to where we lived safely. So basically I was a security detail, a bodyguard was my primary job. And then my company's big job was to help rebuild the police department.
Yeah. So kind of the urban domestic analog is there's like a limo, there's some important guy in the back, there's a driver up front, and then kind of a bouncer up front, and you're the bouncer.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Taking him to the club.
Yep.
Okay. And how long was you said 6 months or a year?
I spent just over a year in Baghdad.
A year. And in that time, how many times, maybe this is a number you can count, maybe it's so many that you don't know, would you be attacked in one of these convoys?
Direct attacks where I could like define the enemy only a couple of times, but there's a lot of situations where you don't know what's happening, so you still have to assume the worst. Several situations where we thought there was a bomb on the side of the road, and so we have to stop everything, stop traffic, bring in the bomb squad, and wait for hours to see what's happening. There were times where somebody would take a couple of shots at us from a window and then disappear. So they wouldn't really engage us enough that we would pursue them. We'd carry on with our day because they weren't within our kind of scope of our mission. So there was a lot of that kind of stuff that happened, I don't know, more times than I could count, but maybe once a week, every couple weeks. Like that was a pretty regular occurrence where the adrenaline's through the roof. You're doing all of the assessment, the checking. Are we in danger? What kind of danger? Where is it? In terms of actual attacks, there was only a handful of times where in that moment, I was afraid I might not make it out. And that was at a personal level. At a company level, our company did have a pretty rough year. We had a couple of friends that ended up wounded and that backed out, and quite a few attacks on our company because the police stations were a prime target, and anybody helping the police stations were a prime target. So there was a lot of attacks against us for the work we were doing.
Yeah, I see. Okay, but for you, I'm just trying to imagine your reality. Obviously, fear is high. You're surrounded by unknowns at all times, but most days are uneventful in terms of this driving back and forth. Maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks, there's some sort of threat that you end up spiking the adrenaline and waiting, and maybe it's a bomb, maybe it's not. And then every few months, there's actually a, oh, shit, what's going to happen?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And it's a weird world to live in because the bases we lived on were quite secure and life was normal. We sat outside and smoked cigarettes. We joked with our friends. You'd go to the chow hall and get dinner and hang out with people. We watched TV. Eventually later in the deployment, we got our hands on an Xbox. And so the guys would sit around and game. There was this downtime that was painfully boring. And you just hung out doing nothing. And then you'd gear up. And every time you left the gate, every time you headed out to work, there was an increase in the adrenaline because you never know what's going to happen. but it kind of was a level that didn't feel different. And then there would be the things that would spike. And then you would come back and you'd take all your gear off and go sit outside and smoke with your friends and hang out until you did it again.
So there's an opportunity here I can't pass up. Every time I hear about boredom, I think of meditation or self-improvement. You know, what are the things we can do to improve our experience of consciousness that don't require a frisbee or some other toy, you know? So for me, that's meditation or reading. How prevalent was that? And kind of, I'm guessing there's kind of some intense, maybe psychological barriers to doing that, but I'm just curious about that.
I think there was a lot of coping by not coping. I don't think I even heard of meditation or understood what it was until after deployment. While I was in Iraq, this is a whole other conversation we can definitely circle back to, but a few years after coming home from Iraq, I walked away from my faith. I was raised Christian, I was raised Methodist. The Bible was very important to me all through my deployment. I went to services, I went to Bible studies. And so I'd only ever heard of meditation in kind of a religious context, which I ignored because to me, the answer was prayer. And so there was a lot. I think that there's the sentiment of that there's no atheists in foxholes, which I disagree with because my roommate was very much an atheist. And I introduced me to what atheism was. I mean, we would sit around and have theological debates in our room. But I think the better saying is more that the foxhole will really divide you one way or another. And so kind of for a lot of us, there was a lot of not coping. So getting lost in TV and video games. And then there was those of us that really leaned into our religion and really tried to fill the time and look for answers within that. And then there are people who already didn't have faith. So they just kind of carried on about their day and coped in other ways.
Okay. So at the time you did spend a lot of time with the Bible.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. You were right. We could talk about all these things in minute detail forever because I haven't had these experiences. So I'm just so curious. But all right, let's go back to the thread we set out at the beginning about purpose. And you said that you felt it in high school and then you lost it and you came back to it again. Is the thing you felt that I just want to make one person's day better every day? That was yeah. And so did you feel like that's what you were doing in Iraq? Or when did you lose it? Are we to the part where you lost it yet?
I lost it in Iraq. I warned you I would cry. Iraq broke a part of me. And you can diagnose it as PTSD. There's a conversation about moral injury that we don't talk about enough, that a lot of times kind of tags with PTSD. But there was so much that happened in Iraq that made me question humanity. It made me question my faith. It made me question myself. And when I came home, I was struggling with an injury. I was struggling with PTSD. There was 2 or 3 years where I shut down and kind of stopped functioning within society. I was never really actively suicidal, but I very much wanted to be dead and not have to figure out everything I had just been through. And so there was years of that. And then there was this year of trying to regain myself. I realized I very distinctly remember I woke up one day and I realized I hated my life. I hated the feelings I was having. And I very clearly decided that, okay, today I either have to kill myself or I have to change everything about how I'm living my life because I cannot keep doing what I'm doing. And so I made the decision to call my mom and I said, I'm not okay. And I don't know where to go for help. And so my mom helped me call the VA. We got me in with a therapist. We got me in with a doctor. And then the couple years of my life was just devoted to getting better. And so really that thread of getting back to helping others has only been in the last few years where I have been healthy enough and remembered that that's what I wanted and have been able to kind of put all those pieces back together, because there was 5 or 6 years that life was about me and or not wanting to be alive.
Wow. There's so much there. And that sense of despair, I love how you put that, of not actively suicidal, but just like not wanting to change the states, but just wanting the state to be different. Where was that connected to you losing your faith? That's one question I have. And also, I've never heard this term moral injury. And I'm guessing it's like very wrapped up in what you're saying. And I'd love to know more about that.
Moral injury can kind of help with I lost my faith in the midst of all of what I just talked about. It took me a few years I started looking at other religions for answers. I started studying Judaism. My dad was going to a Buddhist temple. I went to temple a few times with my dad and studied Buddhism. I was like, where can I find the answers? And I tripped over a newsletter about secular humanism and secular humanism. And I was like, there's a thing. There's a thing that doesn't involve a god or a higher power, but still has a doctrine about being good.
We could still be good to each other without a god creature?
Right. And that put me down this rabbit hole that took a couple years to where I finally came out, and I'm just an atheist now. And, that was that. But to circle back to part of what drove that is moral injury. And so moral injury is this idea that we're raised with morals. For me, being raised in the church, do not kill, do not kill, do not kill, is this thing that's preached to us. And then you go to combat, and my job potentially could involve killing other people. I'm thankful every day that I never pulled the trigger. We were in some very close calls. There were some times that I thought I was going to have to take somebody's life that at the last minute, for a variety of reasons, I didn't. And I was so thankful for that. But even that, I feel guilty about that feeling, because I was told not to do harm. I was told not to kill. And yet I was in this combat zone where we prayed that God would keep us safe before we went out on a mission. We believed that our God was better than their God, and that we were better people because of the God we believed in. And there's this contradiction of thought of do not kill, but if I kill you because I'm here in this combat zone, it's okay. And these ideas that conflict in law enforcement. I have a friend who's used to be a city cop, and a similar thing of like raised Catholic, told not to kill anybody. And yet here his job is, with all of the nuance that makes law enforcement horrific. I mean, to call it what it is. And part of what drove him out of law enforcement is he could no longer mesh his belief with his job. And so moral injury is this idea that my morals were injured, that these things didn't line up anymore. And that was one of the things that brought me to questioning my faith, was how is it that I invaded their country and yet my God is right? And how is it that my life is more valuable than their life because of my God? And how is that fair? And how would we ever classify one human life over another human life? Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. And so it was that conflict of belief and action that made me question everything about my life and my belief structure, and essentially is the root of like what moral injury is.
Wow. I mean, God. So I grew up in Washington State, not so far from Montana, but I mean, my experience is so different. So I have all these questions that are kind of basic, because I didn't grow up religious at all. It's like a little bit Hindu, but mostly atheist. So, and I've always been a little bit stupefied by the connection between Christianity in the US and the military, because it seems like there's this like kind of clustering there. But so this might be a naive question, but as you were going to go into the military, were there people from your church that were like, hey, that you might end up like violating everything we've taught you, and you got to be careful and like look at this in a more nuanced way? And when we said thou shalt not kill, there was this asterisk, and you're going to be part of the asterisk, so like don't worry about it. Was there any discussion like that?
No, it was always, we're proud of you for defending our country. We're proud of you for standing up for quote unquote what's right. There was never a conversation about what all of this could mean, like how it all could mesh or how it all actually clashes. And yeah, it's actually kind of funny. I recently started a new Twitter account to separate it from my work Twitter. And I put in that I was a veteran, and I followed a couple of people that are veterans, and instantly everything that I'm getting recommended right now is very conservative and very Christian. The algorithm picked up on the word veteran, and that's all it's pushing me. And I'm like, but that's the stereotype, is the number of veterans events that I have walked into that people assumed I was a wife or like just a spectator. I mean, that's always the presumption. Nobody ever assumes when I walk in a room, even at a veterans event, that I might be the veteran.
Really?
Because I meet none of the stereotypes of being a veteran. I'm young looking. I'm female. I'm not particularly big in stature. I'm well spoken. I'm an atheist.
Mm-hmm.
I have a bleeding heart liberal.
But they don't know those things when you walk in the door.
No,
yeah.
No. But the young female is usually what throws them off just at first glance. Is I'm not a 60-year-old white man. Most people still, and I'm 100% guilty of it myself. I assume most veterans are 60-year-old white men, even though statistically that's not the case anymore. Yeah. So.
And then the other thing that struck me about kind of what you were sharing about the moral injury is when you were there in Iraq and praying with your team members and company members, there was this idea that the God you were praying to was different than the God in Islam.
Yeah. Yep. And that because we were Christians, because we were of the right faith, that we deserve to be protected over them or protected from them.
But is the whole concept with the monotheistic religions that it's just like, it's the same God?
It depends on who you ask. There are a lot of people that do believe that it is the same God by different names. And the argument is more, what has that God taught us and how should we follow those teachings? But there are a lot of folks, and this leans more into fundamentalism, evangelicalism. This is definitely not my area of expertise, but there are a lot of people who believe they are different gods and there is only one true God, which is the Christian God, and that's the only right set of messages. And any other God is a false God or a misunderstanding or not real.
Fascinating. So, yeah, because it seems like pretty clear to me as a student of religion that's the same God. And there's like, Jesus came and he was like, I don't like the way you're interpreting, what's going on with this God, but he's revealed to me some other shit. And Muhammad was like kind of the same thing. He's like, I got this other message from the same guy.
No, some people believe it's, different guy. And it was interesting too, then even within Iraq, because the country is obviously very driven by its religion. And so there's the different sects of Islam, as well as its own Christian population. And so we had to be aware of what territories we were in, because they tended to kind of live amongst similar beliefs. And so like one of our police stations was actually in a neighborhood that happened to have a lot of Christians, and they loved us there. And we were very safe there, and they would bring us food and bring us tea and want to take pictures with us. And then there was other neighborhoods, and I don't remember which was which now, but there was one of the sects where they were very anti-American, and we had to be careful in those neighborhoods. And like, I would cover my face because I didn't want them to know that I was a female in a power position, because it made me an even bigger target than just being an American soldier. And so we would get through these areas as quick as we could. I would get rocks thrown at me. We would get spit on. Like there was, even within that country that is predominantly the same religion, they had very different views about us, which was always fascinating to me.
So you got back in 2004. There's this extended being lost, and then this extended healing from being lost. And now, I want to hear the good part of the story. I want to hear the happy ending.
The good part is I finally got my shit together. Gosh, yeah, I did. I mean, I had like a year where literally my job was going to doctors. I was doing group therapy, individual therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy. Part of my injury was a traumatic brain injury. So navigating, learning how to read again, learning how to learn again. I had some nerve damage in my shoulder, elbow, and wrist. So managing chronic pain, a surgery to address that and get feeling back in my left hand. Like my job was just getting better. And in the midst of that, I met a guy at a wedding. And this guy's like, hey, what do you like to do for fun? And I didn't think I'd ever see him again. And so for the first time in years, I was completely honest and owned my story. And I said, actually, I have PTSD and I don't really leave my house. Like, it's a big deal that I'm here at this wedding for my friend. And he was like, oh, okay, well, you seem pretty cool. You want to come hang out with us this weekend? And it's now been, I know, I ended up married him. We've been married for 10 years now, 9 years now. Like, it just, there was this moment and I just was like, fuck it, I'm going to own my story. I am broken. I am in a process of recovery and I don't know what my life looks like anymore. So let's try. And we ended up dating long distance. He navigated and learned how to handle panic attacks. I used to have a lot of big panic attacks back when we first started dating. And he took it in stride and he learned. And I bring my husband up because I think he was very pivotal. He's an amazing person who showed up at a very pivotal moment. And not that he made me better, but he helped create the space for me to continue to get better. And from there, I went back to college. I got my bachelor's degree in political science. I went on and got a master's in mental health counseling. I worked as a therapist for a while, starting to tie back into that, like, okay, I can help other people with my experiences. I did counseling for veterans, which turned out to be too triggering because I was still working through my stuff that even though most of the veterans I worked with were Vietnam veterans, it's still very much the same story, different generation. And so I left that. I worked as a crisis counselor for high school kids, which I loved, but also is exhausting. Like, shout out to anybody that works with high school kids. They are a lot these days. And I don't blame them. Like, they got a lot in the world to navigate. And so my husband and I agreed, for the better of my mental health, that I would take some time off work. And we were going to start a family and I was going to be a stay-at-home mom. And it turns out we're both very infertile. And we went through a couple of years of really hard infertility treatments. And I kind of lost that thread again and kind of lost myself again. And it's been the last 3 years, like, we can go back and talk about all of that. I'm fast forwarding to the good ending, the good news. In the last 3 years, since we made the decision to stop pursuing children, we live happily child-free. We refer to it as child-free, not by choice. And I've embraced that life. And I've gotten to explore, who do I want to be? Because I don't have to be a mother. I don't have to be the only title I have to keep, just technically I don't even have to keep, is being a wife. And outside of that, I get to do whatever the hell I want. And we've agreed with my disabilities and my mental health, I do best not having a regular 40-hour-a-week job. And so I've spent the last 3 years exploring who I want to be and what I want to be. And I've come back to this, like, I have such a powerful story, and I feel weird saying that out loud, but I have a story.
You do. You have such a powerful story. I'll say it out loud for you.
Thank you. I have such a powerful story. And I've started hearing other people when they tell me that I can do that thing of helping somebody else by sharing my story. And I accidentally tripped into a keynote talk that we jokingly titled "The 7 Life Lessons I Learned from Being Blown Up in Iraq," which has now become kind of the foundation. It's now 8 practices, but those 8 practices have kind of become the foundation of how I help people navigate life-changing events, build self-trust for themselves, work on personal growth in the face of life-changing events. And now I finally feel like I'm back on that thread that started in high school that kept getting lost in the midst of some really dark stuff.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is the marketing on this last part is so good that I'm not going to ask all the questions I want to ask about the thing you just fast forwarded through. And can you tell me the 8 practices, or because I always ask people, there's 2 things I always want to ask people on the show are, what are things that the listeners can do to improve their lives today that kind of come out of your story, not something you read about, but something you lived. And then kind of what's your definition of a hero? But I'm just gonna take over that second question. And I love what you said about how your husband helped you, how like you were totally straight up honest, like this is going to be a project from moment one. And I mean, to me, it's like totally heroic to like look that right in the face and be like, bring on the project, and not try and fix you or be the solution, but just create the space for you to fix yourself.
Yeah.
Gorgeous.
He didn't know we didn't know he was doing that. But yeah, the 8 practices, I have them on a sticky note because
but he knew, but hold on. But he knew a little bit because he was like, hey, you want to go on a date? And you're like, I've got serious PTSD. I don't leave the house. And he kept going.
He didn't know if he believed me that I was as big a train wreck as I was. We were at a friend's wedding. It happened to be my birthday that weekend too. Like everybody was having fun, just hanging out. And it was kind of one of those, we lived 2 hours apart, and it was kind of like, hey, you want to come up and see me next week? And I was like, sure. And it was very casual to begin with. And then I think the moment it clicked for me, and the moment I give him probably the most credit for, is I think our second date. And we were at a fundraising event. Essentially, I had a massive panic attack trigger, and it was an event that he needed to be present for. And here's this girl he's been on like 3 dates with, sobbing uncontrollably, like completely stressed out, freaked out, like can't really pull my shit together. And he handled the situation beautifully in a way that I couldn't even ask somebody to do. Like, he walked me out to the truck. He checked on me, asked if I needed anything. He went and attended to his event for a little bit. He'd come back out and check on me. He didn't try to fix anything. He didn't honestly know what was going on because he hadn't really ever interacted with any kind of mental health issue. But he just kind of rolled with it. And I got through it. We got through the evening. We had the rest of our weekend together. I went home and I was like, well, that's it. This guy's never going to want to see me again. Like, that was embarrassing and awful. And he kept talking to me. And he was like, hey, like, what was that? And what can I do better next time? And I was like, oh. He was like, hey, you want to see me again next week? And I was like, oh. And we just learned to work through it together. I had to learn how to talk about it because I'd been isolating for years. And so I never had to explain to anybody what was a panic attack? What can you do for me during a panic attack? Like, I had to learn all of that with him. And so then I was able to teach him, like, okay, here's what really helps me. Like, personally, I like to be hugged really, really hard. And back then I had him literally whisper in my ear, you're in the United States and you're safe. And just repeat that over and over and over until I calmed down. And I had to figure out that's what I needed, because I will say, disclaimer, like, some people when they're having a panic attack, absolutely do not touch them. And so, like, I had to figure out what I wanted. And then I had to tell him that. And I said, I can't tell you in the moment what's wrong or what caused it. I just need you to remind me that I'm not dying and I'm not going to die. And then after I calmed down, we would debrief it and we'd talk about what triggered it. And so I had to learn all my triggers, and he learned with me. And so then it got to be almost a joke. I have a friend who loves this story. So we'd been dating about a year at this point, and we go to his brother's wedding, and they had warned me that they bought fireworks for the reception. Like, I was very open about my PTSD, that I'm still struggling. And so they'd warned me that they bought fireworks and that they would warn me before they set them off. And I was like, that's awesome. You guys are the best. Like, you can warn a veteran that you're going to blow stuff up. We greatly appreciate it. And we do the reception. The wedding's wonderful. We're leaving a little bit earlier in the evening. The whole party wasn't quite over. It's my father-in-law, my now father-in-law. It's my husband's dad and his dog, and my husband and me. And we're walking across the parking lot. And I don't know if you've ever been to a big fireworks show where they have the big mortar tube type fireworks. there's a sound as the firework leaves the tube. And it's a very subtle little sound right before the explosion. And I heard that shunk because we'd left. So they didn't think to warn me. They didn't realize I was like in the parking lot. And I heard that shunk and I immediately tensed up. And as soon as the firework exploded, my husband knew loud noises, explosions were a trigger for me. Immediately, he just wrapped his arms around me. And my father-in-law's dog, being a dog, immediately panicked. My father-in-law scooped the dog up and wrapped his arms around the dog. And so here's my father-in-law and my husband both went, it's okay. It's just a firework. I'm right here. You're safe. It's just fireworks. They walked us, they put me and the dog in the back seat of the truck together. We held on to each other and we all got in the truck and left and it was fine. But it was just this moment where like I realized like he learned all my triggers so well that as soon as like he was a half second behind me, so I would react. And as soon as I tensed, he would react and he knew what to do. And it eventually got to the point where we basically mitigated the panic attack. I stopped having the panic attack because he was so in tune with the situation that he could intervene before my nervous system could flip out. And it was, I think that learning together that made me own it and made me articulate it, and him just rolling with the punches that helped my recovery and makes him a pretty stellar husband.
Yeah, so beautiful. What a beautiful kind of path or journey to walk together of observation. Like, I mean, to me, that's real. That's like the definition of intimacy. When you like understand how someone's going to react when you perceive the stimulus that they're perceiving. Okay. The 8 practices. How do you call it? What do you call it? You have
I call it the pursuit of evolution, but the 8 practices that are kind of the part of the pursuit of evolution. So number 1 is owning your story. I'm going to rattle these off and then we can absolutely talk about them however you want. Number 1 is to own your story. Number 2 is that there's no one right way to do anything in life. Number 3 is baby steps. Number 4 is boundaries. 5 is face it and then face it again. Number 6 is find your spark. Number 7 is embrace your strength and balance your weaknesses. And number 8 is to never stop learning and growing.
So as I hear that, this is what I want to do. I want to have a whole other interview and a whole other episode on really getting into like a masterclass. I don't know if is that what they call it, but just like a deep dive on those things. But for now, just to round out this episode, tell me what have you come to in terms of you're asking yourself this question over the past few years of like, how do I want to serve? How do I want to make people's lives better on a daily basis? You've developed these 8 practices that I'm so excited to go into. How does that express itself right now in your life?
So I realized essentially the root of all of that is change in our life is inevitable. Everybody's going to have to navigate some sort of change. But as I watch people dealing with change, as I watch how I handled the PTSD from Iraq versus recovering from infertility trauma and medical trauma, is the choice to evolve from those situations. Like the evolution is optional. So the change happened to me. I had no choice in how that was going to play out. But what I do after that moment and how I choose to evolve and incorporate those things into my life is completely optional. And so that's what I've really leaned into personally. Like that's how I look at my life is like, okay, I'm not happy with this thing. Can I change that thing? No. Okay, then how do I change how I respond to or am around that thing? And that thing could also be a person, like boundaries is on the list. A lot of this is how we handle other people in our life. And so now and as I watch people in my life navigate their own stuff, I'm like, oh, you're dragging your heels. You're refusing to change despite the fact the universe is shoving you through this change. What if you evolved? What if you leaned into the change? What if you embraced the opportunity, even though it's not what you want? I saw a lot of this in the infertility community. I was in a lot of support groups and people would come up on this kind of end of their journey where there's no more options. Like your choice is to be child free. And so are you going to embrace that or are you going to forever fight that? And I watched people just throw away years and years of their lives being angry and resentful that they couldn't have a baby. And I watched other people lean into it and say, okay, what else could this mean then? Like, absolutely, I grieve that I don't get to have kids. And sometimes I still get blindsided by that grief. But that means my husband and I can move across the country. It means like I completely changed my life because I don't have to worry about how a tiny human fits in it. And that's awesome. And one life isn't better or worse than the other. They're just vastly different. And so now my goal is spreading that message and having those conversations and helping people see that, like, okay, maybe this isn't the outcome you wanted, but how can we make it the outcome you want? How can you find a way to settle this into you?
Oof.
And
I love that.
It.
Yeah. I mean, you have many, many powerful experiences, but like two of the main ones are this injury. Well, these two injuries, like the physical injury, the traumatic brain injury, and then the moral injury in Iraq. And then this experience with infertility. And what I see you doing is creating a story where what you're doing now and what you're going to do in the next while, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, I don't know, is only going to have been possible because of those injuries.
Yeah. And I always want to like disclaimer this. I firmly don't believe that things happen for a reason. I watch people go through just devastating loss. And I think some of this is that faith conversation of like, oh, it happened for a reason. That's bullshit. None of this happens for a reason. It's chaos. But I can choose to pull from it and give back from it. Like I let those losses drive me. And for whatever reason, I am a person who has been very comfortable sharing my story. And that in and of itself is a gift because a lot of veterans can't talk about what they went through. But I can help give them a voice. A lot of people in the infertility community can't find words for that kind of grief. But for whatever reason, that hasn't been hard for me to share. And so like, what more powerful thing can I get out of life than to help give people a voice and help them feel heard and seen? And even if those are the only two communities I ever help, that's a hell of a lot of people. So I'm okay with that.
What an understatement. What a gift to be able to serve that many people.
Yeah. And so, yeah, trying to remember that, like I said, back to that original thread of if I can make somebody's day a little bit better, I've been successful. And while I navigate life these days and pandemic and my health as it is these days, is trying to remember to get back to that level. And so, because I get really lost in the big picture of this is a big, grand feeling message of teaching resilience and self-trust and personal growth. And it can feel easy to get overwhelmed by how big that is. And so I try to just, some days it's like, okay, just go on Twitter and be nice to somebody. You know, like sometimes it's that simple because that's all I have the capacity for that day. Just this morning before this call, there's an influencer I love. I follow all of her content. Like I'm a fangirl, and I messaged her this morning, just a little voice message on Instagram. I was just like, hey, that post you put up, like, I really loved it. Here's why it resonated with me. And I got the sweetest message back from her. And like, I know I've made her day a little bit better. And so like, check the box. Today was a good day.
And so that's part of your daily practice is every day to make sure. Beautiful. For people who want to learn more about what the message that you're shouting from the mountaintops, obviously we're going to do another episode and we're going to go deep into it. Are there other ways? Are there other ways they can find you, they can hear you, they can reach you, they can interact with you?
Yes. The best ways to find me, reach me, interact with me are Instagram, Pursuit of Evolution Pod is the handle there. My podcast, The Pursuit of Evolution, where I have these conversations about people and their change and talk about all of these practices with them. And my website, just CaseyJordan.com. And I love, love, love hearing from people. So my DMs on Instagram are a great place to connect with me directly.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Casey. It's been so amazing to get deep into your story. I'm moved by your experience and also your openness, your vulnerability. It's an incredible example.
That concludes another episode of the 10,000 Heroes podcast. Your hosts are Ankur Shahdalit and Nathan Ramos. Let's roll out of here with some gratitude. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you to our guest, Casey Jourdan, for your inspiration. Thanks to Pierre for the awesome show artwork. And thanks to DJ Plainview for the theme music. Thank you to our audio editor and producer, Martin. And to everybody out there, if you like the show and you want to support our mission, support our growth, there's two things you can do. I mean, there's many things, but let's start with two. The main one is to reach out and let us know how the show has contributed to your life and how our show could contribute to your life even further. Do you get what we're trying to do? And I want to know. And once you've done that, the next best thing is to share the episodes that have touched you with people who they will also touch. It's that simple. Share the love and take good care.